Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's public lecture. I'm really excited that we're having this lecture at this point in time because you believe with me that we're at an inflection point. We are living in a hyper-connected world where we're having lots of devices being hooked to the internet, whether that's via the Internet of Things. Organizations are increasingly also moving their digital infrastructure to the cloud. So you will believe with me that the attack surfaces are increasing and cybersecurity is becoming a challenge for everyone, especially in the age of AI, because it's now easier and faster for people with malicious intent to craft tricky cyber problems, forcing all the ransomware attacks. But I'm also excited that I can't think of people better qualified to look into this matter and to kind of explore what's happening in the field and what professionals are doing than the two speakers we have today. First, we have Dr. Cyril Onwubiko. Cyril is currently the Chief Information Officer at Barclays, where he oversees the security for the Barclays Cross digital platform. Cyril is a true pioneer in the field. He's the founder of the Center for Multidisciplinary Research, Innovation and Collaboration, also called the CMRIC, which hosts the flagship Cyber Science Conference series. He sits on the board of governors of the IEEE Computer Society and is a distinguished speaker and recipient of the prestigious IEEE Computer Society Golden Core Award. Cyril has a PhD in computer network security from Kingston University, and he has graduate credentials from Oxford, University of Oxford, Side Business School. He's has built a cybersecurity functions from ground up at major organizations, including the Home Office and DWP. Don't worry, once Dr. Siri shares back his slides, you're going to see that his affiliation extends to multiple pages. So, without further ado, I could spend the entire first half of the public lecture introducing our speakers. Let's see some of Cyril's work. Please make welcome Dr. Cyril Onwubiko. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. That was quite an extensive intro, but anyway, I appreciate that. So I've got come a long way with Xavier, and I'm pleased that I'm sharing this platform with him today. So no better person to share that except him. The work I'm presenting today is work we also worked together. So during the pandemic, we were all locked down in 2020, and as an engineer, I like to do something. So I start to twiddle my thumbs, and I looked at various repositories. I didn't find any cyber resilience and cyber recovery operational framework. So the underlying is operational framework that is free available for people or students, users, and enterprise. So that's how this was born. So I then started to create CROFT, which is the cyber recovery operational framework. And then we got to introduce it to the likes of academics, Xavier, and a couple of other people. And then we made it public offering, so it's actually out there for use. There's a couple of early adopters who are using this today in the industry, and also students who've used it to do a couple of research work and also extended it. It's also being used in utilities. Smart meter in Glasgow are using it for their IoT, OT type work, and I believe one of the consulting firms are also using it in South America. So it's quite it's been used out there by other reputable organizations. So that's why I wanted to discuss it today, but it's also pertinent to what is happening in the industry today with the pace of convergence, with the way we are all interconnected. a singular incident can have wider ramification. I think 2 weeks ago, Amazon East West had an impact, and then it crippled a number of services that couldn't connect, including Spotify and even Netflix. So that is how impactful a singular issue could have in the most connected world we live in. So that's the reason why this is important. So and what it does is what I'm trying to explain is that okay, probably my intro, and I will shorten this. So Alumni, Oxford, Kingston, IEEE work, EPC is the European Public Policy Committee, and I do work also with the Computer Society. And then this is my career work. And recently I work with Barclays and also head the founder for the Center for Multidisciplinary Research, Innovation and Collaboration, which also Xavier is one of our founding members there. I have a number of books, so you can look it up on Amazon or any other reputable libraries. So the reason I mentioned this is that when I looked at in 2020 and I didn't see anything, but I also looked at what's happening out there. And this was in 2019 when Elon is trying to showcase his Cybertruck to the investment community. And one of the selling point, even though it was an expensive vehicle, is that it was bulletproof. And it has been engineered to withstand any sort of attack, whether it is a bullet or physical attack. And here he was with Hans. Hans was his technical engineer at the time to showcase that he couldn't. So he gave him a small little metal bulb to smash it on the on the side window. The idea was he wasn't going to smash it, but to the surprise of Elon and Hans and all the investor community, it smashed it. So he gave him another ball to then throw on the rear side of the car. Did something happen? The crux of this message is that even with the best engineered vehicle, even with the best engineered cyber, things do happen. It can happen due to a number of reasons. It could happen due to cyber attack. It could happen due to error. It could happen due to accident and mistakes. So things happen. And because we know things will always happen, what we tend to do is to then create a mechanism to recover from the eventualities that would happen. So how do we recover? How do we become very resistant and provide mechanisms and framework to then guide people to recover, knowing that is inevitable. So that's the message here. And in doing that, what we've done is that we've gone and spoken to a number of people, whether it is industry peers as organizations or customers, to say, okay, what would you think would be the most important three things that sticks to your mind when it comes to cyber recovery? And one of the things they said to us, the most important is how do they recover if there's an incident or a data breach? And what the two factors that are actually giving rise to those type of questions is regulatory pressures. So depending on the industry you work, there is regulatory pressure to become very cyber resilient, which means if something happened, which it will happen, how do you continue to provide services in the face of adversity? How do you continue to run your services even though it's limited and constrained, but still be able to provide those services to citizens that might need it or to your customers? The other aspect is also driven by requirements to provide services to your customers. So not regulatory or pressures from mandates, but precious because of brand, because of trust. So, and the other thing is when you recover, how do you also maintain the services and bring it to bear? So, you can withstand the attack, but then for the failed systems, how do you bring those to bear? So these are the three things that we found, and these three things actually helped us shape the framework you're going to see. So one of the things we then did, okay, how do we provide this framework? What are the current challenges? So There are a number of challenges. The first we found with most organizations, including universities that most of you are in or work at, is that companies don't even know what they have. So if you work in a company, they always have what they call CMDB, which is the Configuration Asset Management Database. If you look at those, it's always lagged in time. It's always not incomplete. So companies don't even know what they have. And where they exist, they're very limited and they may not know who is responsible because people move. So the person who was responsible before may have moved the organization and gone somewhere else. So it is difficult to actually have a comprehensive asset database of what organizations have and also who is responsible. The other challenge we found is like anyone else, you don't have an open envelope, so you can't spend however you like. There's always financial cap, there's always cost constraints, and therefore you don't always refresh your systems as and when you should. So systems run technical debt, some of those has got out of license, some of those are obsolete, and some hardwares have been retired, but they still sit in the data center or they still sit in your organization. With technical debt, it's difficult to recover quickly because those systems are out of support in the first place, and some of them are no longer legally binded by the support system you have with the organization. The other challenge we have was lack of understanding the dependencies. So the world we live in today is interdependent. So your hosting provider might be using the same hosting provider you use. So if the fiber breaks, both you and your service provider is cut out. And that's what the example of what happened last 3 weeks with AWS and the outage it caused. So understanding the interdependencies of your system is a big challenge. A is within the subsystems and also within the super system. So what we mean by the super system is you connect to the internet through an ISP. If there's a failure in the ISP, you have a failure. You have what we call downstream failure, or what we call the last mile. So imagine BT is your service provider, and the BT runs the cable through to the exchange, the POP, to your home. If BT fails, the exchange to your home will fail. And the BT and you might also be using their own peering providers who are their ISP that is also providing them the backbone network. If the backbone network fails, both your carrier and the POP and the last mile will fail. And understanding these dependencies helps. And sometimes people design, oh, there's a backup system and there's a redundancy system without knowing that even beyond the ISP level, the actual carrier is one. So you might say, okay, you build in redundancy and you go and say, for example, you go to Vodafone, you have a carrier with Vodafone, you also have a carrier with BT. But what you don't know that they might be sharing backbone network. So if the backbone network fails, both your dependence ISPs will fail and your services will fail. So understanding those dependencies at the service level, at the application level, at the carrier level, at the backbone level is important. And then what we then found is also, even when you do all of this, is a new area. Cyber resilience is relatively new, and cyber recovery is also relatively new. So organizations may not have the processes in place, may not have the playbooks in place and the plan. Even when they do, the way they exercise those is usually once a year, once a month, and they might do what they call backup and recovery exercises, mainly as a backup. But they never truly and truly recover, i.e., let us recover the disk and then recover it into another entity. So they only do a backup and show you the backup. But when there is crisis and incident, you find out that some of those backup is either the media is corrupt, or they can't recover the whole data, or actually it's encrypted, in which case even the key and encryption is held by somebody who probably have left the organization. So understanding those processes and playbook and plan were some of the challenges we found. And also, the other bit is when you may have this, they may not be trained. So you don't have infinite amount of money to train everyone. And the people you train might also move around to find jobs elsewhere. So the expertise and the training within the organization may not be there. And you may not have all the training and expertise. You could also do a subcontract where you contract dedicated SMEs or organizations like Xavier's organization or other organizations who look after this. But we still find that there are gaps in doing that because some organizations may not see the relevance until when there is a problem. And last but not the least is also regulatory compliance and lack of investment. So you might have regulatory compliance that says that shall back up, that shall have recovery mechanism, but you might be constrained because of finance. So to the level in which you do that might be different in from one organization to the other organization. So these are some of the challenges we found as we spoke to individuals, but also institutions and different organizations. So that gave us to why then recovery? Why does it matter? Why would you want to do that? So the things we found out is by having a recovery operational framework that you can use and rely helps you with compliance. So you can then, establish and prove that your organization is compliant to cybersecurity, maybe NIST cyber security framework that mandates certain things, or it would allow you to establish and prove that you are compliant to ISO 27001 or whatever standard you comply based on your own regulatory framework. It also helps you save on your cyber insurance premium. So cyber insurance would ask you, can you show us your attestations to certain standard? Can you show us how you would perform certain things? If you do, then the rating would be higher for organizations who don't, compared to organizations who don't have. And based on those ratings, they would then proportionately allocate the premium you would pay for cyber insurance. So having recovery there would help you with compliance. It would also help you with reducing your premium you pay on cyber insurance. The other thing it does is actually build trust to your organization. So today, if you follow the investment community, you find out that Apple is rated highly in security and privacy compared to, say, Meta or Google because they have over time demonstrated that trust, that they care very well and very much for their clients in terms of security of their data and privacy. So if you're able to demonstrate compliance to this, you're able to gain trust to your customers and to your following, which is one of the things that helps with cyber recovery. The other thing also is you will be able to demonstrate reporting. So in organizations that are hugely into compliance, there's also regular reporting that you provide to them to demonstrate attestation, to demonstrate compliance. And because it's planned, you would also reduce in cost because you would pay for standing up the services. Whereas if you didn't and you had a crisis, the cost of recovering in crisis is far more. You're going to be downtime, the business will stop, you might face liability in terms of fines that would be allocated to you, and you might even go out of business. So being proactive in cyber recovery does save you cost on the longer term, compared to what you would do in a crisis mode and how much you would pay for failure to doing those things. Again, it's going to make you a good citizen, in which case you can prevent breaches because you know what your interdependencies are, you know where the assets are, you know who holds them, you're a lot more to react quickly if there's an incident compared to some organizations who don't. So that would also help you in reducing your susceptibility to data breaches. And of course, with the trust and cyber insurance and compliance, you win more businesses. So these are some of the benefits of having cyber recovery and cyber resilience in an organization. So let's take you through the framework. I'm not going to walk you through all the framework. The framework is online and you can download it and use it. So what we've done is we went through an exercise, a very detailed exercise in trying to understand the various things you need to do in order to recover if there's an incident, but more so to prevent it, but also withstanding and recover if there's an eventual failure. There are different pillars. There are about 8 different pillars. So it starts with identifying what you have as an asset and then classifying those into criticalities. What are critical assets and what are non-critical assets? What are the critical technical assets? What are the critical non-technical assets? Who are the stakeholders responsible for it? How do you prioritize? And it takes you all the way to industry best practices, i.e., what are the best practices I could and our organization could do in order to recover? What are the industry best practices we could apply for our crown jewels, for the critical assets, as opposed to non-critical assets? I'll give you one example just to showcase what I mean by critical assets. If I take a university as an example, one of their assets is their website, and that's how students know about the school, and that's how they apply. Another asset they might have is students' record database. So a database that have the records and certificates of all students and the year they graduated and when they and what courses they took. If you look at these two, if you were to assess these two assets of a university, you find out that the database that holds the students' certificates and when they graduated is more critical than the website. So that is how you can then say, okay, which one should we prioritize most if finance is a constraint? If we had only $10 and we can only invest $10 in one asset, which one would you put it to? That's what we mean by prioritization. So it's a small exercise you do, but as you go through those, then you come into here is a prioritized critical asset. And therefore, what are the controls we need to put in place as guardrails to make sure they are secure, to make sure that within the realms of those security, the controls are proportionate to those criticalities of the asset. And those assets, you can then start to draw their dependency map to say, okay, if it's a database, how do I even access the database? Is that through a VPN or through a physical access or through an internet access? Therefore, you now start to look at the dependence in terms of how you even access that asset. And then understand those dependencies. We say, okay, if this were to fail, could I then use a backdoor? Is there a backdoor? Is there another way to access those services? Who could then even drive to data center to get access to it? So these are the things that the model will walk you through as you look through it. I know most of you have got your smartphones on. So if you scan this QR code, it will actually take you to the framework today. So you could actually play around with it and use it to either, as a student, use it to do either a research to further understand if there's gap in our framework, and then feed it back to us, and then you use it to develop. Or you can take the framework and use it as your framework and apply it in your industry in order to carry out cyber recovery framework assessment. Or you can also use it in a university to say, okay, here is what I want to do as a research area, and I want to study one of the modules within this framework. So there are many use cases that you can use this framework for, and all of those are articulated on the website, on the framework's website. So have a look and see how it goes. So I'll walk you through the core areas without going into this. So we followed the same model of identify, protect, prevent, discover, and remediate and improve. So it's similar to most frameworks. So how do you identify those critical assets? How do you then provide the controls to prevent, protect, detect? How do you then map those into the dependencies? What are the plan to exercise? What are your plan to do recovery? What are your plan for BCP, business continuity measures? What are your plans for crisis management? What are your plans for resilience? And then you play out those plans. So you exercise those plans. Then you measure those plans. Then you test them and then you improve. So there is continuous improvement as a loop. So that's what the framework actually does. What I'm going to do before I walk you through the different areas, and allow you, because what I want to do is to give us the key building blocks, then allow you to actually use this framework on your own. So if you imagine those 8 different pillars, each of those have their own control set. So what we mean by control set is what are they deriving? What are they after? How do you use this as a guide in order to do the exercise? So we started with the identification. So you have RC. RC means recovery, cyber recovery. Then the IP means they identify P1 and P2, P3. So within identify, there are three different control sets you can use to identify assets, identify criticality of those, and then prioritize the assets in terms of stakeholder responsibilities. If you go into control, there are four of those. So these are recovery controls. So what are the controls I need to apply for each of those assets? And where do I need to apply those? Then into map. Map is how you understand the dependency mapping. So each of the assets and their controls, so you map them to the dependency. Does one depend on the other? So as an example, if you're using a VPN, before you access the database, you would first of all launch a VPN. Using a VPN, then it becomes a way to launch to go into the database. If your VPN fails, you won't be able to logically, as in online, get into your database unless you drive physically to where the database is. So this is how you can look at the dependency. As an example, if you are a website, for your website to be up, the hosting provider needs to be up. The server where it's hosted needs to be up. The connectivity in terms of network onto the server needs to be up. Therefore, for you to access the content of that web server, the server itself needs to be up, the connection needs to be up, and then your remote access needs to be up. And that's how you browse. So understanding those handoffs and their dependencies is important for you to then use the framework in order to protect the asset. Then you have to look at the various ways that you would plan the recovery. So would you recover whilst you still withstanding the attack? So imagine there's an attack. Imagine that a reason why the failure is happening is because you're under sustained attack. Then the first thing you're going to do is the first plan is, could we still operate our services but at a very constrained, minimized level whilst we're still dealing with attack? And then the other bit would, how would we then roll back to the backup or to the different clusters whilst the attack is still going on? And eventually, if there's no way to do that, how do you eventually recover from all of those? And then you have to play. Play is the way you exercise those. And then once you've played those scenarios, you then start to look at the optimal. Is it optimal? Does it meet our measures? And then you measure those. So what's our RTT? What's our recovery objective? What's our SLA? What's our OLA objective, operational objective requirement? And you set this per organization. So there is no silver bullet. Each organization will define their own SLA, their own OLA, and the various metrics they want to measure. And then based on that, you test and then you improve. So that's the way the framework is laid out. It's very structured, it's very enterprise oriented, and is modular. So the modularity is, if you're a one-man business, there are certain controls here that would be compressed instead of you having an extensive enterprise level. And if you're a large enterprise, then you can use the whole framework. So when you look online on our website, you see that we have what we call the cut-down version, and then you have an enterprise version on which you can use depending on your circumstance. I didn't want to take much of your time today. As I conclude, I want to leave you with this. So for whatever you're doing in cyber, just bear in mind that it will never be fully proof secure. Things will happen. Things break by accident. Things break by failure. Things break by cyber attack happening. Therefore, the best way you can protect is protection through prevention, through detection, through recovery, and bearing in mind things will go wrong, then prepare your recovery in advance. So thank you. And if you want to connect, here again is a QR code to connect to myself, and then always feel free to reach out. So I will hand back to you guys, and then we can get the second speaker, and then I'll take questions at the end of his speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cyril. That was incredible, amazing. Thank you. Hoping that everyone has been busy taking notes and has come with lots of questions. Um, our second speaker is Dr. Xavier Bellekens, and Xavier is the CEO and co-founder of Lupovis, a pioneering cyber deception company that emerged as a spin-out from the University of Strathclyde. Dr. Bellekens brings a unique combination of entrepreneurial vision and academic excellence to his work. He holds positions as an assistant professor and a chancellor's fellow at the University of Strathclyde and serves as a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's CROFT Center for Strategy and Security, where he advises on critical infrastructure and maritime cybersecurity. Dr. Xavier is also the vice chair of IEEE UK and Ireland Cybersecurity Group, and his company, which means wolf and sheep in Latin, has revolutionized threat detection by transforming networks from vulnerable targets into intelligent hunters that deceive and trap attackers through AI-powered deception technology. And I'm going to stop there, just like I did with Dr. Cyril, so that we can get started. I am really curious to see how sheep and wolf can coexist peacefully in your presentation. Thank you, and over to you, Xavier.
Well, really appreciate the lengthy introduction. Thank you very much. And what a great presentation, Cyril. Really enjoy that framework, and thank you everyone for inviting me today. So let me share my screen for a second, and I'll get going. So you should see now one empty screen, and we should now see some slides. So I think it's interesting that we follow obviously Cyril and the framework that he has set up, because we fit quite well in RCT2, which is like an RCT3, the threat modeling and the threat intelligence part of the framework Cyril just presented. And today I just want to talk about something that we do at Lupovis that is also um, underused in cybersecurity at the moment. And what I'm going to be talking about is using preemptive intelligence. And so if you're familiar with Gartner, Gartner essentially are, I would call them trendsetters in technology, but they essentially are a body that looks at what technology is going to come next. And recently, Gartner talked about preemptive intelligence as the fact that 80% of companies' budget by 2030 would be spent on preemptive intelligence. So if you remember Minority Report, this is exactly what we are trying to do, but in the cyber world. How do we predict that a cyber attack is about to happen? And I'll give you a couple of things that we do, but also a couple of things that you can do yourselves or think about. So at the moment, the way cybersecurity works is that we are working on defensive security. We are building our cybersecurity very much like a castle. We essentially have water around our castle. We usually try to build our castle high up a mountain so we can see far away if an enemy is arriving. And then we are building a defensive structure. So very much defense in depth. But the main idea that we still see is that we are going to get a firewall. We are going to get intrusion detection systems. And we often quite to like to build cybersecurity around organizations like the wolf is still outside and never inside. Now, does it work? Well, when we look at cyber attacks, essentially, and I can see that, oh, perfect, the slide moved. When we look at cyber attacks, here's a couple of minutes ago, I was looking at like who had been breached and what was happening, and you can see that like UPS confirmed data being stolen after a cyber attack on an external suppliers. 200 patients armed in major cyber attacks. WestJet investigating a cyber attack. So we see more and more cyber attacks, and those cyber attacks are successful. Even large organizations are being impacted. Like if we think about Mark and Spencer, the Co-op, Victoria's Secret. Those I think have also made the news quite a couple of months back. And Scattered Spider was at the center of those cyber attacks. And so, despite all of the technology that we currently have that is aimed at defending, there are still gaps. And the reason is the fact that technology evolves, people are evolving as well, and there's always a chance that at some point we left something unattended. What we propose is essentially an assumption that you have already been breached. And this is very similar to what Cyril proposed, like focusing on recovery and a recovery framework. Here we are like doing a slightly different exercise, but still in the same line, very focusing on like the fact that either we know we are gonna get breached, and so we need to prepare, or someone is already inside and we want to prepare. And that is more active defense. And in order to focus on active defense, we need to be able to respond to a threat. We need to be able to engage with threats. We need to deny the position of an attacker in the field. And most importantly, we need to be able to anticipate the movement of an adversaries. Why do we need to do that? Because if we start thinking like adversaries, it gives us a path on which we can concentrate. Some of us work for SMEs, some of us work for universities, some of us work for multinationals. And so the path of an adversary in all of those cases is going to be different. And different adversaries are also going to take different paths, like from being external into being internal. They may also want to focus on different types of data. So starting to think about the type of adversaries we are going to face. Not everybody faces a nation state. Not everybody faces a script kiddie. Not everybody faces a ransomware group at any time. So we can start placing scenarios and thinking that if we are going to face a nation state, because let's say we are working in the defense industry on the engineering side and we produce patents that may be of interest somewhere else, well, we may want to think, how do they get from being outside to getting access to those patents? And if we model that right, we can start thinking about increasing the effort of those adversaries, wasting their time and confusing them. Now, this is not new. Sun Tzu already described that in his war treaty. Make yourself appear strong when you're weak, and make yourself appear weak when you're strong. That's one of the Sun Tzu quotes. But military deception has existed for years. If we look at like World War II, we can think about Operation Bodyguard. Well, Operation Bodyguard was essentially the umbrella deception during World War II, which was mainly aimed at misleading the Germans. Now, within that umbrella, we had Operation Fortitude. And Operation Fortitude was quite interesting. It was like just trying to make the Germans believing that we would attack somewhere else. And so what they were doing was essentially faking like tanks and trucks and radio traffic just to generate some signal in one place, making the Germans believe that the allies would invade somewhere else. And then we had the Ghost Army, and the Ghost Army was inflatable tanks. And the idea there was to make them believe that we had like a full army of tanks that were able to invade. And in fact, we had none of those tanks. And that's interesting because you can see that it essentially shows the enemy a totally different perception of the reality. Now, everybody uses deception in their life every single day. People lie. That's a fact, right? Some folks masquerade the truth. If we play with children, we play hide and seek. And that is while a gentle form of deception, still a form of deception. We use it in sport, where we have sports strategies. If you look at like movies from the 80s, like I think Coach Carter talks about like deceiving adversaries in the Coach Carter movie. And so there's at one point, everyone in this room may have used some form of deception and deceit. And so there's some, of course, that are harmful. There's a way of coverdness, right? Like if we try to hide or bluffing, if you've ever played poker. But either way, that is part of us. And this is something that we underuse in the cyber world. Now, some nation states will use deception. And for example, here, a couple of months back, we have seen Twitter accounts, essentially bots that were trying to use deceptions. In this case, like talking about Israeli fighter jets that had been taken down. Now, the accounts were bots, but you can see that there's trying to manipulate part of the public opinion. For good or for bad. That's not the case, but you can see that it's also bad deception because like it's an AI generated. Now at first look, you think, oh, okay, it could look real, but then if you look here, you can have like the people are very small compared to the size of the jet, or you get a logo on the afterburner of the jet. You also get like people that claim to be TikTok. That's a message that I received essentially, or someone was offering me some money to work for TikTok, right? And so here there's like someone from Adecco, and that's in French, but essentially it says that like they were taking 50 euros from 70,000 people at Adecco, and they stole 1.6 million, and it took like about like a year to be found because they had masqueraded the way they were employing this. So we can see that this is being used everywhere. Now, in cyberspace and for cyber defense, we can look at deception strategies where the main objective can be either to obtain high fidelity alert. So essentially, you plant a fake asset within a network or outside of a network, and you hope that the adversary then interacts with it. And so, because it has no meaning or no value for the organization, you get a very high fidelity alert out of it. And from there, if you entice the adversary to interact with that fake asset, you can waste their time, you can mount an effective defense because while they focus on that fake opportunity, you get that signal, you get data, and you can obtain techniques, tactics, and procedures. So think of it as like if you had like a fake door on the side of your house, right? Well, your family and yourself would never open that fake door. But a burglar doesn't know if that door is fake or not. And they would have to try it in order to enter your house. And maybe it leads to a wall, for example, or maybe to a room. And that room may have like certain pieces of information that gives the adversary or the burglar information on where to find your jewelry. But that information is fake and you're just wasting their time until the police arrive and a silent alarm has gone on. And that in cybersecurity is called a honeypot. And honeypots are part of a field called cyber deception. And the main aim there is finding the needle in the haystack. When you create a fake asset, you can have quite a lot of noise that is being generated. But what you want to be able to do is essentially finding information that are going to let you know that an adversary is there. And so with honeypots, the great thing is that there are a lot of use cases that you can start looking at. If you place them inside of your network, you have pre-breach detection. If you have a red teaming exercise or a pen testing event, you can detect them before in your security operations center. If you have like a Samba share, so a place where you share information within the company and one is fake, and suddenly one of the employees starts interacting with it, you know that essentially there's probably someone that is an insider threat because none of the employees would have any legitimate reasons to get there. We recently had that where someone was looking at bonuses. They were searching for the level of bonuses that they had. And so they were scanning the network and found like a Samba share with fake information and they were trying to access it. And that was not legitimate. You can go and protect legacy operation technologies. You can protect intellectual property. You can detect if an adversary comes back. But there's two things that can be done really, really well. If you place those fake assets outside of your network, you can start generating pre-breach detection and generate intelligence. Now, all the other use cases are valid, but that also means that you've already been breached. What I want to talk about is using the same technology and placing it outside of a customer network. Imagine you have like uh, your company has a website, maybe you have APIs, maybe you've got like a developer's website, documentation. You can have a plethora of things. And maybe your company has a firewall. What if you recreate a firewall in there? You add a new service that is a fake firewall, acts exactly like the same firewall. When someone interacts with it, you're going to go and get a high fidelity alert. Based on the alerts that you get, you can start generating key intelligence. Now, the problem with intelligence is that quite often there's a lot of data, and most organizations do not need an extra threat intel feed. What they need is the right information at the right time. So quite often you have a lot of companies have threat intelligence, but they've very little relevance. So for example, when Mark and Spencer got breached, Tesco knew that Mark and Spencer had been breached, right? They announced it. And so in the threat intelligence feeds, what you got was the fact that someone else within a region and a sector had been breached. Now, that threat intel is interesting, but it's not a threat insight. It's not real time. And most importantly, Tesco still doesn't know if they are a target. And so does TK Maxx. They might have wondered, are we going to be a target? And others have wondered the same. See, threat intelligence is like opening the newspaper. Someone within your neighborhood has been burglarized. But the question is, am I going to be next? And so that question is usually not answered. Now, using preemptive intelligence, you can deploy a strategy. You can think of it as deploying a sensor outside of your network and start gathering data about the use cases that we were mentioning earlier. If I look at the techniques, who is interacting with my decoys? What are the tactics they're employing? Are there any patterns? And based on the location of my sensor, does that make any sense? So that's a deployment strategy that you can actually use. If you then map that to your use cases and say, well, I'm in the same sector as Mark and Spencer, Mark and Spencer has been breached by Scattered Spider. Am I starting to see the same patterns? Now you can derive intelligence that is specific to you, that is essentially contextual to your own organization. And that essentially allows you to make a decision on whether you are being a target right now from the same groups that may have attacked somewhere else. Now, I wanted to give you a concrete example of all of this. So we have a company in manufacturing. They're very large, quite prominent. And they came to us and said, look, we would like to increase our visibility into threats. So understand who is at the border of your network, very similar to a ring camera, essentially. On your house, you have a ring camera. Well, if you check your ring camera, you see who's outside the door and you get an alert. Is that alert an Amazon delivery driver or someone trying to break in? So increase your visibility into threats. Identify the adversaries. Remember, your ring camera is like AI built in probably, and so it tells you if it's a friend, your neighbor, the postman, or if it's someone that it has never seen. And of course, improve the detection capabilities. So how does the adversary operate for you to be able to make a decision? Now, here's a bit of like data from the government, the French government. They say that like 5 in 8 companies reported a cost of a cyber breach exceeding 230,000 euros. That's about 200,000 pounds. So being able to do that would essentially help organization quite a lot. So what we decided to help them do was deploy 5 external decoys and 20 internal decoys. Now, on the external side, we looked at like SSH servers, Outlook portals, Citrix gateways. Internally, like they had like a big HR department, backup solutions, Samba shares, SCADA, so quite a lot of data that they were generating. And what happened was that after the launch of a new product, early January, what we saw 6 hours after was that because we get about like LibreOffice gets about 500 million signals per hour, we started seeing uh, interesting data. Now, you don't need to map it specifically like we do onto groups, but it helps. We started seeing Cagbot, Anonymous Sudan, and APT37, which is a North Korean group. Now, when you start looking at the data, Cagbot is essentially an interesting one because they do quite a lot of ransomware, and it's interesting. Note that we see Scattered Spider in there as well, by the way, on the right side, but they were still unknown at that time. So this is very interesting. But at the time, we focused more on APT37. Anonymous Sudan was just probing. They didn't do anything interesting, but it's good to know the adversary that you're seeing. So we started looking into APT37, and as you can see, if you map our data to MITRE ATT&CK, you see that they're North Korea, they're state-sponsored, they've attacked South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Russia, Nepal, India, Kuwait, plenty of companies in the Middle East, but also in the UK. And we started looking into them. And when you start looking into them, you see that essentially one of the things that they do is they drive by compromise, but they do phishing and spear phishing. So you start mapping that piece of information. They still don't know they've been detected already. They've started mapping your external assets, by the way. They're not in the network. They're still outside. They're interacting with your fake firewall, your fake Citrix gateway, and all of that. So they're not yet in there, but they are looking for initial access. So they might have already done part of a spear phishing campaign. And in this particular case, this is exactly what had happened. 6 months before the breach, well, it turns out they had essentially compromised engineer's account, and those had been undetected. And essentially, what happened is that the adversaries, North Korean group, had kept those accounts, never used them, never sold them. So those accounts were not found on the dark web. They had just kept them specifically for the day they could use them and do the most damage. Why? Because if a company launches a new product, brand new product, well, that's the time where something needs to happen the most. That's the time where you start needing, like your entire company is focused on the launch. And so if you get breached and you get a ransomware attack, there's more chances for you to start paying. And essentially here we can see on our Citrix decoy that someone is actually starting to log in, and they have the real password and they have the real username. And essentially those were matched by our services, and we were able to tell the company, by the way, something's happening. By the way, someone is writing on my screen. I don't know if you can see this, but I think someone's writing lines on my screen, like green lines on the screen. But essentially, you can start getting that data and match it with Entra ID, for example, and seeing if these accounts that have been compromised are still in use, or if you want to isolate, so that data can be passed to the Security Operations Center as a high fidelity alert, as someone that is trying to breach your organization but has not yet done so. That's very important. Now, why is this important? Because that company told us afterwards that a minute of downtime would have cost them $75,000. So the intellectual property those engineers have access to is about $1 million. The mean time to detect of this solution was immediate. It was a pre-intrusion event or a pre-breach event. So preemptive security really gives you an asset you've detected outside of the network. You've not been breached. Cost of the solution for this is about like 50K, right? Now, if you look at the ROI, and no matter what the preemptive solution you're doing, like you're getting, it's very interesting because like in this particular case, an hour of downtime would have cost them 4.5 million, and they would have that company with a couple of days of downtime would have gone bankrupt. Now it takes between 24 and 48 days for someone to, I think there's another mic going away, by the way.
Please, if you're not talking, let the presenter talk. Can you mute yourself, please? Thank you.
So a couple of days of downtime would have bankrupted the company, and the average time for ransomware recovery is between 24 and 48 days. So you start having a loss. Now, in this case, we don't know if like 100% of the IP would have lost, but if they had launched a ransomware successfully, they would have definitely lost about like 75,000 per minute of downtime, which is quite a lot of money. So preemptive security really brings something. Being able to do active defense means that you're going to be able to stop an attack before it even reaches your inside network. So it's something to consider if one day, to whether it's tomorrow or in a couple of months, you focus on building a security plan. Well, preemptive security must play a role because it's a technology that is underused but can deliver quite a lot. And now there are plenty of like different preemptive security solutions out there, Lupov is included, but all of them, you might benefit from all of them by detecting as early as possible, especially when we see that the average cost of a breach, whether it's in France or in the UK, when we look at the IBM report, IBM reports it's 4 million, the French government reports it's 230,000. So every country has an average cost of a breach. I can't remember what the from the top of my head the NCSE is, but the cost of a pre-breach solution is less, definitely less than the cost of a breach within an organization. And I think that's it for my side, and all I wanted to let you with before we go to the question is that, as I said, preemptive security is very similar to your Ring camera. It's better to understand who's at your door than discover that someone is inside of your house.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Xavier. Impressive presentation from yourself and from Cyril. Right. We're now moving on to the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please, could you use the virtual reaction buttons to raise your hand? I haven't seen anything in the chat yet, so if you have any questions, please. While we're waiting for others to get their questions together, I have one, and don't mind going first. So this is for you, Dr. Xavier. My question is, so I really like the idea of deception, and I think when I wrote this question down, you've gone on to throw more light on what actually happens. But my question was originally, you know, how do you know what to show, if you don't know who the enemy is and what they are looking for? So, you gave the example of having a deceptive door by the side of the entrance to your house. So, if do you just how do you decide which digital assets you want to expose? In a honeypot, for instance.
So
That's my question. Yeah.
I think this is obviously quite interesting because like if you just take what Cyril presented, I think his first part is identifying like the critical technical and non-technical assets, and companies do repertoriate the assets that they have. So based on the challenges that a company is going to face, so financial institution, for example, we work with, will have like they will have a website, they will have a portal, they will have APIs, right? Another type of company, a university, will have a slightly different attack surface. And based on that, you may want to change the type of assets that you put in terms of like deceptive assets. And this is why putting yourselves, like preparing yourselves for a breach, but also thinking about like what would an adversary try to get if they breach our organization. And when you put yourself in the shoes of that adversaries, and this is something, this is an exercise that we do, for example, with customers, we say, look, your external attack surface look like this, you're a financial institution, you're a university. This is what we would recommend as external assets. And then they say, well, internally, our biggest risk, for example, is ransomware group or insider threats, and our crown jewels are customer data or student data. Well, then in that case, you know that you're going to start placing assets that fit that narrative and that story, so that when an adversary breaches, whether it's someone inside of the network, they clicked on a link, and like adversaries now got access to their laptop, or like we've seen North Korea sometimes getting hired. There's been a couple of cases where North Korea tried to pass an interview and got sent a laptop to someone in the United States, and they get remote access, right, to the entire system. You have those assets ready that if something happens, you can generate a high fidelity alert. And in all honesty, assets can take almost any shape or form you want in the network that essentially have no value whatsoever to the organization, but will definitely generate a high fidelity alert when interacted with. Does that answer your question?
Impressive, yes. That was very comprehensive. So you start with the framework, and obviously, you lure them in. Thank you. We've got a couple of hands up, so I'm not going to take any additional time. Professor Babs Oyeneyin, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, everybody. My sincere apologies for just joining. I forgot to realize we're 1 hour behind Nigeria. So if you've covered what I'm about to ask, apologies up front. Nigeria is a very peculiar country, and with due respect, they are very advanced with respect to the application of what I call the general or generic AI, and they are generating a number of information. And yesterday, on BBC Morning Live, they were even able to demonstrate even messages regarding one of the presenters, AI generated with the voice. And some of you must have seen some scam calls in relation to that. And there are banks and financial institutions that actually are trying to rely on maybe fingerprint or even voice. What's your view about this with respect to this cyber security when it comes to Nigeria? They are
Cyril,
very advanced in terms of the general AI application. You've seen some pictures of all the world leaders dancing to Nigerian outfit and all the rest of it. So it's a worry for some of us. I just wonder what your views are on whether you've managed to be closer to home and address this peculiar issue.
Cyril, do you want to maybe go next?
Okay, I'll take it. And I'm gonna speak generally rather than very specific to Nigeria. So
Okay.
misinformation, disinformation, and generative AI threats are on the rise, whether it is in Nigeria or in the West. That's one fact.
That's true. Yeah.
Is on the rise, and it will continue to be on the rise because the way to use those things now has been reduced. So barrier to entry is no longer difficult. So you can hire a botnet or a scam feed for less than $3 to do those things. And you can also use social media to amplify those. So it will continue to be on the rise. What is happening in most places is the ability to be able to now detect. And there are many research going on in that space and also early detection tools that would be able to spot what is fake and what is genuine. So there are techniques like what they call embedded codes in certain images. So if you generate the general original image, you embed a code into it called stenography. So with the stenography, you can compare it to a fake one. Again, it's still very easy to go through without any detection in the normal eye. It's difficult to look at those and detect whether they are genuine or not. So it can still deceive a normal person. But what industries are doing is applying defense in depth, similar to what Xavier talked about. So for the normal usage, there are things you do to compare the hashes, i.e., a fake to original one, and use the hash. But deeper in your network, there are things we do called a step up. So we try to step up the authentication in a way that the adversary would have to demonstrate that it's them or demonstrate that what they're sending us is high fidelity and is the right content. So it's the sum of what you're trying to say is difficult. It's not just only fingerprint, whether it is voice biometric or what we generally regard as biometric fingerprinting. So it's not just only fingerprint, it could be voice, it could be face scan. You can deceive a basic detection tool with those. But as time goes on, there will be different ways of countering those. But it's a very difficult space we are in. And mostly the way it's being used today, because of low barrier to entry, it is actually causing a real issue in society.
Yeah.
Zevi, do you want to chime in?
I was just gonna add something which is interesting because like I've just had a peek into how one of those things works. Essentially, if you generate AI music, right? And this is interesting. When you generate music and like you actually are a band and you record music, quite often a software from like the Adobe Suite, for example, is going to be able to isolate every single instrument. Now, when music is being generated, you can not dissociate like the flute from the trumpet, for example, because the music is to our ears, it sounds right. But once you pass it into like a couple of filters, it's very difficult to dissociate it. And with voice, I've seen a couple of companies, including 11 Labs, which is a voice generation company, like this demonstrating that there's the same effect where you try to dissociate some of the sounds and you can see that there's a blend into the sounds and even passing them through filter. And this is how, for example, Google detects, YouTube, sorry, same company, but like Alphabet and YouTube detect if something is being made by AI or if something is being made and using human voice. So there are a couple of things that you can start doing now. On images, it's slightly more complicated because like it might be like details and signatures and things that are embedded within the image. But from a human eye, it's becoming more and more complicated. But from a voice perspective, there's definitely cool techniques that are being researched and are very impressive to look at.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, both of you, for your responses. Engineer Stephen Ogwine, please.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. And it's been a great presentation from Dr. Cyril and Xavier. I think this question perhaps align more to Dr. Cyril. So CROFT is something I would like to have a look later on, but I was just thinking, what standard is CROFT based on? I was just thinking about mapping that against known industry standard like IEC 62443 or even the NIST CSF. So we're wondering if you could share more detail on that, or it's just, yeah, thank you.
That's all right. Thank you. So CROFT has no specific standard it aligns to. So what we did was we looked at the National Institute of Standards and Technology called NIST. Their cybersecurity framework is called CSF framework. If you look at it, is what organizations and people use for cybersecurity. So it goes through the identify, detect, respond, recovery. And then we looked at ISO 27001 and 27002, 1504, 3350. And these are framework that talk about how you do cybersecurity. But within cybersecurity, there are different domains, and Xavier touched about it. So there are about 5 extant domains. So you have your identity domain. So whether it is IAM, identity and access management, that's a domain. Then you have your data domain. Then you have your infrastructure. Then you have your threat detection and recovery. So what NIST did was NIST lumped things in different domains and bundles. So you have identify, which goes into not just identifying the assets, but also risk management. Then you go into detection. Then you go into prevention. Then you go into recovery. But what they did was that recovery was very high level rather than operational. So we went down to now distill it and expand it so that you are not just being given a standard without how you use it. So that's why our framework is a toolkit. A toolkit means that you say 1.1, this is what you do. 1.2, this is what you do. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but the short answer is you can map it to different standard to then align to that standard, so long as it's for recovery and resilience. So as an engineer, you can say, okay, I'm going to use 802.11g, which is Wi-Fi, and I'm now going to use this to see how I'm going to recover a Wi-Fi if there's a compromise. You can also use our framework to say, okay, now I'm in satellite. I'm using satellite communication. How do I recover from a satellite? So rather than which standard we use a number of standards, is how can you use our framework to show evidence of recovery for your engineering standard. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think it does. I was just thinking in terms of use and application, how would, for example, is this basically for research just now, or
No,
is
it's not for research
previously?
now. So it's been applied in industry. So the use is if you are an IT officer or a risk management person for your organization, the question is if you wanted to protect them and you put your firewall, IDS, whatever, the question the auditors are going to ask you, how do you know that you can recover from this if there's an incident? So the framework then would be applied to your organization to demonstrate whether you're able to follow our framework and recover. And that would then give you a report to say, here is where you are deficient. Here is where your controls are not meeting the right requirements. Or here are areas that needs improvement, or is where you're doing well. And that is then what that report is what you then present to the auditors to say, we have used the CROFT framework to do an assessment, and here is our gaps, and therefore we're going to have improvement plan. Or by the way, we're doing so well because we meet these standards within the framework. That's how to use it.
All right, just one last one. For that to happen, it means the framework would have been partly or in full certified by, regulatory bodies. Does that, is that the
So our
expectation?
framework hasn't been certified. One of the final phases of what we're trying to do is to get it through a standard in its own right. It goes through what we call 1548 or 1504 standard, where then as a framework is standardized, you can then take it as a standard to then demonstrate at that high level. But nothing stops you using it today is to still derive your reports and then present it to the auditors. But as a standard, as a framework, it hasn't been standardized yet.
All right, thank you very much. That's all from me.
Thank you.
Right. Engineer Stephen has shown off his cyber expertise. Engineer Shagun, please.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Xavier and Cyril. I think I'll just have one comment and one simple question to Dr. Cyril. It may have been answered in your last response, but I'll still ask it. I think for Dr. Xavier, I really like the idea of deception, fake firewall decoys, to get high fidelity alerts. Usually in construction where I am, we call it early warning alerts or early warning notification. And I think that idea can even be applied in a physical scenario, physical life scenario. So that was a good one, at least. That's one thing I picked from that. For Dr. Cyril, I was just thinking, I know this is a framework which you have developed. If an organization wants to adopt it, is there a testing process? Or because I would imagine they won't just take the framework and just apply it to their system. They would probably want to look at it, and whichever is applicable to the organization, they want to probably put it through the test before they then um, um, apply it or acquire it or deploy it into in their organization. Is there a testing process?
Yes, so there is a testing process. So they just before I answer that, just to give you some insights into what we're developing. There's also a manual we're developing. That manual is not for public view today. It's a manual that assessors, people who would be using this to do an assessment, would be trained on. And it will give them insight to saying, if we said RC.IP1, what is the right information we need there in order to demonstrate that the company complies to that. So that manual is being developed, and that's the manual that the assessors would use for the test. And that also would be an exams they will write in order to say, I'm now certified to use CROFT. But to answer your question, the model of applying this is you use it and then you test. And then as you're testing, you say some of these are not applicable to us. For example, in the case where you, one example where we have seen this is there might be a clause that says about subsystems and systems. And in your case, you don't have subsystems. All your systems are standalone, like physical systems rather than virtual systems. That clause will not apply to you. So you will say, we do not have physical systems. You don't have virtual systems and there are no subsystems. Therefore, that clause is not applicable. So when you do these tests, then you remove some of the clauses that are not applicable to your organization, and then you use it. And then that will derive where you need improvement plans or where you meet it. There's another thing we also developing, which is specialist sectors. So we know that healthcare requires specialist things. They use like patients care, patients platform, which is different. So we're also creating sector-based CROFT, tailored to sector-based. So you have oil and gas CROFT, you have healthcare CROFT, you have finance CROFT, which means we go into details into the subsystems they use and then tailor the framework there. And that work is also ongoing.
All right, thank you. That's fine.
Thank you very much. Professor Babs, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just
On
want to
this?
make an appeal, and I'll give you a personal experience that has shocked me. And this is more to Dr. Cyril, and if he can collaborate with Dr. Xavier, fine. In Nigeria now, and since many of us are actually Nigerians, the government has been making an attempt for you to be able to access your data either through your national identification number, we call it NIN, and again through the bank you call BVN. The dark world in that country, they are way ahead of the government in that. And I'll give you an example. I had applied for a building plan for almost a year, and just about 3 weeks ago, I went to their office, and they insisted that I've already got the approval and claimed it. And what I found out is somebody has actually hacked into my picture, I believe either from LinkedIn or whatever. And even my name, what saved me was that they had my middle name shortened to Babs, whereas in my original application, it was Babajide with all of the other names. So I'm just wondering if, at least if Dr. Cyril, and I want to challenge you to try and help the government, because they are way behind these dark world people, and they are pulling everything under one umbrella to use your NIN other for driver's license, even this, their tinted glass stuff for election. And people are beginning to actually hack into all of this. Are there any ways you can actually use it as a kind of support or research or an R&D development to support the governments in Nigeria and also other African countries? Because it's becoming rampant. I was shocked by how they managed to get my name and my picture. The only thing that saved me is the middle name, and then but the guy who actually was using my building plan was building a house in Ikare in a town I've never been in my life, and where my application was for Lagos. So that was what saved me, and they are starting all over again. And I'm sure I'm one of millions of Nigerians maybe experiencing this kind of dark world, really.
The first thing I want to say is I'm sorry to hear this, and it really can be, frightening and overwhelming if you are subject to a cyber attack or impersonation. It's one of those things that really puts someone at a higher alert and distress. So I'm sorry to hear that. The second is I welcome the challenge. So I've been in cyber for the last 20 years. And the predicament is actually my area of expertise. So I've built so many security operation centers, both here in the UK government, so the Home Office and the DWP, and for large blues sector organizations. And I work in IAM. IAM is Identity and Access Management. So the way national insurance, even in the UK and in the West, we have national insurance and national identification programs. They are very robust. And one of the things we do, we have what we call multi-factor authentication implemented. And then we go over that, we implement what we call step-up authentication. So if somebody is bad, they access and they want to. So what we do, we ask them to, okay, say, give us another thing. So another factor without, going into detail. So we ask them to say, okay, we want your authenticator app. And can you send us the last 6 digits of the authenticator app? They will fail on that because they are not you, because they haven't been enrolled in their mobile. If they succeed in that, we step you up again. We say, okay, now we're going to step up authentication. This is what we now need. We need your finger and we need your face, and we want you to turn a certain way to record those voices and record it, because we are doing matching. And once that goes and it's still within a threshold that is suspicious, we decline it and we say, come to the physical office. So there's a branch here, we want to see you. And they wouldn't come. So that's how we can prevent it. This is an area that is well researched, that well implemented in the West. I think the problem with what you're describing is also what we call idiosyncratic problem. So in Nigeria, it's very, very peculiar. I'm Nigerian, but I have been living in the UK for the last 25 years. I see the predicaments and read them, but it's very idiosyncratic. It's not just the lack of technology. It's probably the way things go on in that country. Anyway, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to bring Xavier into it. If there's a way we can help, voluntary or non-voluntary, any way we can support, I'm up for it.
Please do. Some of us are already who live here for more than 40 years and trying to at least have a foothold in the country. And a lot of us are experiencing this identity theft and the rest of it. So if it's the government is I don't think they are ignorant, but I think people like yourself can encourage them to be able to adopt like what we do, verification, even with NI and the rest of it. I think it will go a long way in saving a lot of people. So please don't give up on it. I know they'll resist you, but please, if that's what NSE Glasgow branch can help to facilitate, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. We do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof, and thank you, Cyril, for that response. I think Prof just hit the nail on the head towards the end about needing there needs to be a bridge between Kindle's connections, and I'm hoping that there are people on the call who can facilitate those connections. Abdul Malik, I think we'll just take maybe two more questions and we'll try and keep it short so that we can, I think our time has been spent. So, Abdul Malik, please, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please make it concise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My question is to Dr. Xavier. With the honeypot situation, looking from a hacker's perspective, with the use of AI tools now, hackers could be able to use AI to detect honeypots. How can differentiate or use a system whereby it diverses the hackers from not using AIs to detect the honeypots in place in a company?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because like we've worked hard with BT on that problem very recently. So there are obviously more adversaries that are using AI for quite a variety of things. Now, in the past, one of the very early things that we did at Lupovis was we created what we call an indicator of intelligence. And within the honeypots or the decoys, we essentially seed them so that information being used, right? So very similar to a pen tester. They see something, they see a piece of information that leads them somewhere else. So you see credentials or you see a piece of information like a print screen. Well, we have information that is so far. I'm saying so far because like AI, the field evolves quite fast. So far is AI proof, but only a human looking at them can take that piece of information and move to the next decoy or the next level or the next stage. Now, we also look at like 144 parameters generally on every single interaction with a decoy. And that also tells us about like the speed at which interactions are being made, that also looks at like velocity of the adversary and all of those. And then we compare this against known human behaviors. And as I said very early, we have like about 500 million signals per day. So we get quite a lot of database, and that it allows us to map the behaviors and take out when we believe this is not a human, but rather either an automated attack or a bot or something else, which could be AI. And now, no matter what interaction you have, if they're outside of your network, if like the decoys are outside of your network, you get a pre-breach event, it matters. However, if suddenly you have like decoys inside of your network and nobody should ever interact with them, whether it's AI, not AI, a human, not a human, it doesn't matter. Something is happening inside of your network, so you should respond. Right. So there's two different of course, objectives to that, right? Inside of your network, you don't want anything touching a decoy, whether it's AI or not AI. You want your security operation center to trigger to have an alert and investigate. Outside of your network, we do a lot more classification into what threat you're currently facing and the way that threat is behaving, so that your security operation center can pick it out and say, that's something that is worth investigating, that's something that is worth automating, or that's something that we don't know, and we need to have like a layer 3 security operation center person that has like sufficient skill doing like maybe launch an investigation into it, or does an incident response.
Thank you. So automation is both the scourge as well as the solution.
Right.
Right. I'm going to ask the final question, and the question is more a comment, but also a question. It seems to me that there needs to be more hands on deck, as you know, as we have more and more things getting online, and as the cyber attack surfaces are increasing. Every journey has a beginning. So I just wanted to ask if someone wanted to become like you, Cyril, or like you, Xavier. where do they start? Especially most of us here are engineers, so we already have some kind of background in engineering. But if someone wanted a career switch or found this talk so interesting that they wanted to follow your footsteps, what advice do you have for them?
Okay, I start, and Xavier, you can complement it. So you can start now, and I'm going to tell you a personal story. Not everyone who is in cyber today started in cyber. Okay, there's research that says before our career life in the modern world, you would have done 4 orthogonal careers. Orthogonal means, say you're a dentist and now you're doing cyber. That's what I mean by orthogonal, not just IT to cyber, let alone engineer to cyber. So you can start. And there are about 10 different domains, and they are constantly discovering new domains. So when I started my career, there was nothing like data science. There was nothing like SRE, site reliability engineer. There was nothing like prompt engineering. In fact, prompt engineering is just 2 years old. So it just shows you how quickly this area can expand. And there are areas that requires high technical prowess. There are areas that require soft skill. We have legal and forensics that require soft skill. We have GRCA, governance, risk, and compliance that require soft skill. They don't have to require technical skill. However, there are technical skills where you look at hardwares, computer security, network security, breaking things and putting them together. So the advice for me is to start now if you want to start and be able to, give it your bit and want to study. I started my career as a backbone engineer. I used to do dock fiber for COLT, City of London Telecoms. I worked for BT as a backbone network engineer, rolled fibers out on streets as an engineer. So before I went into cyber, right? So it just tells you that nothing is impossible if you have the design and that's what you want to do. And the domain is expanding. So it doesn't have to be technical skills only or soft skills. There's a combination of those today. Xavier.
Yeah, I think so. You've already covered quite a lot. I'm just gonna give like a slightly different point here. Recently, someone approached me with the same question, and they are essentially a mechanical engineer, and they said, what do I need to study? Where do I need to start? And you know what? Today we've got access to so much pieces of information. Like whether you want to go on YouTube, there are channels dedicated to get you from zero to hero. This is, first of all, it is very impressive the amount of interesting data that is out there. And the person came back to me and said, "Look, there's so much information out there. How do I focus?" And I've been working in a university, so usually I was the one designing a course. But today you can just, as Cyril said, you can just write a prompt. Right? There's prompt engineers, but you could technically go to ChatGPT and say, "Look, these are my skills. This is who I am, and this is where I want to be. Can you give me a brief overview of the things I need to look at to start in cybersecurity?" And honestly, I've done it. I gave a shot at that, and amazing. It's amazing how ChatGPT can give you not only a summary of the things that you may want to look at, but if you then go and learn, for example, networking, right? And you say, well, I'm going to go and learn networking on YouTube. If suddenly you don't understand subnetting, right, which is like how you're organizing a network, you can go back to ChatGPT and say, "This is where I'm stuck," and it will explain. It's an amazing tutor. It can hallucinate. There's plenty of problems with it. However, I think it's very underused by people that may want to do a career switch. My partner works in a university, and she sees students using ChatGPT to sometimes re-explain things as well. And I think this is amazing because it gives you a slightly different perspective. So I think there's plenty of possibilities out there that you can now leverage. And of course, there's mentorship, there's IEEE, which is like obviously in the Nigerian Society of Engineering, I'm pretty sure that within your global organization, there might be people that work in cybersecurity, might be able to mentor you as well. Having a mentor also helps guide things. So I'm not saying do delegate everything to AI, right? But I do believe that there's quite a lot out there that you can pick up before going to a mentor, before going to other societies like IEEE, before trying to dip in and out. And the cybersecurity community is also, I would say, quite open, to be honest. And it does help. Like that's something that helps. I don't know if like that answers fully the question, but it's certainly something that I've seen more and more from students, and I kind of like it. I think it's a good start there, to just to start essentially.
Thank you. Amazing. That was really comprehensive. Thanks to both of you. There was a comment in the chat, or more like a question. And now that you've mentioned community over and over again, I imagine there would be communities of, cyber professionals. So someone wanted to know if there are any major events or workshops that you have coming up early 2026.
We have the cyber science in London. I will put the address here. So the address is simric.org, which Xavier and I are practitioners there and keynote speakers. So that's one. That's in June next year. And IEEE do have quite a number of conferences coming up, but I'll send you guys the link for IEEE conferences.
And by the way, just to say this, because like it's still on the same topic, one day, as a PhD student, I needed to advance my career, and I saw Simric, the conference, and I dropped an email to Cyril at the time, and that's like almost a decade ago. And I said, look, I'm looking to help, and I was also looking to learn. And Cyril like did what he does, and like literally opened the hand for me as well, and said, let's have a chat. So I do believe that there's a community out there of people that are willing to help, and Cyril was definitely one of them.
Thank you. And that's how we met. And since then, we become very good friends.
Amazing. Yeah, we're a very big guy on community here. So that's all from us. We really appreciate you coming out. I'll hand back over to the branch chairman for any th note of thanks before we proceed with the rest of our meeting. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, Engineer Kelechi. Please, can we use the reaction buttons to please give them a round of applause? This has been a very fantastic presentation from you both. Thank you, Dr. Xavier Bellekens. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And thank you, Dr. Cyril Onwubiko. This has been quite an interesting presentation, insightful one. You will see from the questions that if we want to keep having this discussion, we can keep going on and on and on. And as it is, Professor Babs will always challenge us anytime we have such talks. So he has thrown up a challenge. I think generally what you guys have presented are quite innovative. And then the challenge that Professor Babs has thrown is how to apply it to local environments, which then ties into the theme of our conference, where we hope to be discussing engineering innovations for national impact. So the way some of this innovation could be applied in Nigeria will be different from the way it will be applied in the UK, will be different from the way it will be applied maybe in America, and stuff like that because of peculiar needs. So I just want to thank you both for finding the time. Within the short space, we contacted you guys and raised this up to present these discussions to us on behalf of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, Glasgow branch, and even the globally. We want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. We'll be looking to honestly to engage with you guys further. And just like I keep saying, our big event, which is the conference in about 8 months' times. We'll be happy to collaborate with you guys on that in whatever capacity that deems fit. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you for your time. We appreciate you for coming to speak to us, and hopefully pick up this in other fora or platform. Thank you so much, both.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And
Have a-
Xavier, on behalf of the Nigerian Engineering Society, thank you for coming and giving a wonderful lecture to them. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Cyril.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Have a night.
Cheers.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys.